Thank you again for joining us on another episode of the Factor Care Podcast. Joined again today with Joshua, myself, and we have a good friend, Jonathan James, here to join us today. And we wanted to discuss a little bit about patient access and care. I know myself personally going through this journey of building up this pharmacy and learning more about the community. I didn't realize how many people out there needed help or needed just a support group or something of that. And through Josh and Jonathan, I was able to meet some great people and people in the industry doing great things for people. And, I just, it amazes me that companies like this exist. I think there should be more, but, they really hold an important role in our community. And Jonathan himself, can explain better what they do, but he runs Hope Charities, and we'd like to know a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast. And I feel like we're a band of brothers because it's probably more likely that lightning would strike one of us than it would be that we'd have three hemophiliacs in the same room. So it's always a treat and pleasure to be able to hang out with you guys whenever I can. So a little bit about Hope. Yeah, we started Hope. My wife and I started Hope 14 years ago, and our goal really was to try to help eliminate these unnecessary barriers that exist for people who are dealing with high-cost medication prohibitions. There's so much challenge. I think everybody's familiar with the cost associated with just health insurance in general. That's a huge cost. Then you have your co-pays. When you're dealing with high-cost medications, there's a whole lot of other things that kind of roll around into that, such as specialty treatment center visits, additional testing that has to be done regularly. There's constant increase of medication costs that are going on regularly. And most of the people that we serve are in the bleeding disorders communities. We do help with 10 different disease states overall. So we're serving patients in a vast array of other chronic illnesses and rare diseases. But for the most part, most of these diseases that we serve are people that are living like us. They have very high costs. And I know for my care alone, I'm requiring $1.5 million to $2 million a year and just purely in maintenance medications. And those are oftentimes there's huge out-of-pocket costs that are associated with those that we really all just need help to surround each other and stick together and regroup to try to figure out how to cover that. Now, thankfully, health insurance covers a lot of those things, but because of that, we also have a big giant target on our back. And so the health insurance companies are constantly trying to kick us off, or they're trying to constantly put other barriers in place where we can't get the medications that we need for life-saving care. Yeah. And so we're focused as an organization on trying to remove those barriers that really cause patients to lose their access to those medications. And so there's a lot of organizations that serve in different ways. We just specialize in bleeding disorders and a few autoimmune diseases, and continue to hope to expand and help even other rare and chronic illnesses. But it's really important that these programs exist because without the support, we provide a safety net to people living with these high-cost medications that just doesn't exist without organizations like ours. And so we started this in an effort to do that, and thankfully we're still standing today and continuing to help as many people as we can. But we are a 501c nonprofit. We depend on donations, and it's one of those things that there's no simple answer. It's just trying to help people improve their quality of life and staying consistent with their treatment plan so they can live as long as possible.
Yeah. So that's actually how we got connected in the beginning too, is because you have walked through this process in the past. You were going through it. You were in the middle of, when I met you, I think you were in a wheelchair. So you were in the middle of dealing with massive bleeding issue with both your leg and your arm at one point in time. And we kind of walked through that together for the first 2 or 3 years, but that's kind of how Hope got started, right? So for you actually walked through that as this kind of a living example of horrible circumstances, losing your job. Could you go through a little bit more of that, what actually happened?
Yeah, crazy story. Living with hemophilia, I can remember, and you and I have we all three have similar things. Again, lightning striking would be probably more common than the three of us sitting in the same room. But so being born in the timeline that we were, there really wasn't any treatment available. I can remember, as a kid, cryoprecipitate was the first thing that was available, which took a collection of people donating blood to be able to provide that. And then it was done in small groups, but then later on, it was done kind of like after trauma. So you had a bleed, you had an internal bleed. A lot of people, just to kind of level set, maybe if anybody listening to this doesn't even know what hemophilia is, maybe start there, is that hemophilia is, a lot of people are thinking of it as, oh, you're a free bleeder, and truthfully, free bleeders is probably not quite the right terminology, because, and people ask me all the time, it's like, oh, so if you cut yourself, you bleed to death. I'm like, actually,
can't stand here.
No, I know. It's like terrible. I'm like, well, first of all, I don't juggle chainsaws just to find out. But second of all, I don't know about you guys, but I really haven't had a lot of trouble externally bleeding. I clot actually faster than most people do. But the problem is, it's kind of like you have a protein that's required for the clotting process to be complete. I always use my hands as an example, which is probably terrible. I was probably throwing gang signs or something here, but it's like a dam, though, that you would build like to prevent the flow of water. And so, so usually you have one of these proteins that's missing, and or your body doesn't produce enough of it. And so because of that, the flow is happening. So the dam tries to form, and then it breaks. It forms and breaks, forms and breaks, forms and breaks.
That's
they call that continual flow, because it actually clots in record time. There's a test that oftentimes is used as kind of a surface level test. They say, well, he clots on time. But I actually clot as fast, if not faster, than other people that maybe don't have a bleeding disorder. Yeah. But the problem is, because that dam has this hole in it, it breaks so much, they call it continuous bleeding. And so whenever you have the bigger problem that most of us have as people with living with hemophilia, is actually internal bleeding. It's not usually external. Of course, then again, who knows? But in my case, what would happen a lot of times is I would go just running as a child, or I would be crawling on the floor as a baby, or and I would hit my knee on something or something, and my knee would swell up really big. Or my parents used to talk about when I was in a crib, that they would pick me up out of the crib, and they would set me down on the floor, and there would be bruises where their fingers were. And so those are the types of things that we experience. But internal bleeding is extraordinarily painful, especially when it's in a joint. Like a knee or an ankle, there's very little space in there. There's not a lot of space. And so in that capsule, they call it, when there's bleeding occurs, it fills in where there's supposed to be a gap, and it's extraordinarily painful. And so they used to tell me as a kid that the only kind of pain you can compare a fully metastasized bleed to is that of a mother in labor.
Wow.
I can tell those of you you have kids. I use that I used that on my wife a couple times when we got married and we were getting pregnant and all those things.
That's not going to fly.
That did not help during labor. So if you have hemophilia and you're listening to this, don't use that as an excuse, because that doesn't go with the ladies. But it does.
Cut that out, John.
Yeah.
Might want to edit it this point. But the point is that it's extraordinarily painful when you have an uncontrolled bleed. And so the one thing that everybody deals with that has hemophilia is extreme pain, right? But the other problem that results is that there's because of any kind of fluid in a joint, it causes the body to produce enzymes to go in and actually, it's like, hey, clean up on aisle 3. And so there's all these things that go in to try to, these enzymes to try to take the blood to destroy it. And so, and to dispose of it. Well, those little pieces don't know when to stop eating until they hit something solid. And initially that's cartilage, but that process over thousands of enzymes repeated hundreds of times actually causes joint deterioration. It eats through the cartilage, it eats through all of the other material in there, and then eventually eats through the bone too. And so most of us, the 3 of us here, all have severe joint damage and things that we've suffered from because we had uncontrolled bleeds as children. And again, most of the treatment and the medication was actually happening after one of these fully metastasized bleed occurrences had happened. And for a normal person, everyone has bleeds, but for a person, or as my daughter Bella calls them, basic people, who don't have, they're not necessarily, we're normal too, I'd like to say that, but anyway, but not just, people without a bleeding disorder have bleeds too, but those are usually, you have all those proteins in line, so they clot forms. Now, I would always say, like, if you bumped your elbow on the table, for instance, and again, I'm just sharing this. You guys all know this, but this is for education for all of us, so we're level setting our conversation. But if I were to bump my elbow on the table, a person who's basic and who doesn't have a bleeding disorder would, depending on how hard they hit that, might be more or less sore the next day. So you might wake up in the middle of the night, or you might wake up the next day and be like, oh, I'm kind of stiff, I'm kind of sore. Yeah. Well, that's actually from blood collecting in the joint capsule, but your body went into action immediately, formed that dam, stopped the bleed, and however long that dam took to form is really what determines how stiff or how painful it was. And so as that process happens, you might be really sore for a couple of days. Well, that's because you had a really significant internal bleed, but your body was working against it to try to solve that problem. In our case, even a small little bump can cause a chain reaction where this dam is broken, and so it keeps bleeding into the joint capsule, and the more and more blood that fills in the thing, the more space, and it becomes immobilized a lot of times. You can't actually move the joint, and then it's also very painful. You go to put pressure, if it's a weight-bearing joint, it's really painful.
I was going to say ankle is the one that most people can understand. So they turn an ankle, you get the swelling. They understand that for a couple of days, and then it goes down unless it's like a high ankle sprain. Then they have a little bit better understanding. But even then, they still don't understand the elevated pain threshold that we have to deal with because of that just breakthrough.
That's right.
Fluid going there, which I know for me, my target joint's my right knee. That's where most of that happens on bone on bone. Mm-hmm. I know for Stevie at elbow.
Yeah, I have elbows, ankles. But my thing is, I'm not saying it's an invisible disease, because you'll notice some of us are limping, but it's great analogies you have with the dam and whatnot. But what people don't realize is that when we're having these bleeds, and they piggyback on one another, the joint damage that's happening over time, no one really sees that. It's like, oh, well, you give yourself factor, you're back to normal. It's like, are we ever fully normal afterwards,
Bleed with even one bleed, we've now conceded through studies that just having one bad bleed in the joint causes some measure of damage in the joint. And if the construct of that joint is disrupted at all, you will never be the same. There's no reversing it.
Yeah. And that goes back to, that goes back to when we, so you're 79? I'm 80. He's 84.
If we were to die right now and they resurrected our bones and they looked at to try to do aging, yes, we would probably all be in that.
You were born in what year?
78, 19.
Okay, 78. So I was 80, Stephen was 84. Yeah. But during that time frame, it's we were dealing with a situation with the tainted blood supply.
That's right.
Where it was our parents are really kind of the heroes in all this for me, especially your dad. I love parents. Stevens, I haven't gotten to spend as much time with since we were younger, but that whole situation that our parents had to walk through is just horrific. All of us having children, I can't imagine having to sit there, and I've thought about this a lot because it bothers me, and have an option of, we can either infuse our child and take the chance of giving them something that would actually take their life from us, or we can do it knowing it's going to hurt more afterwards anyway, but it's got to happen in order for them to get fixed. So all of us, when we had bleeds when we were younger, at least this is how I remember it, that bleed, they wanted to deal with it, but it was almost like, how severe is it before we do that infusion? So they had to kind of weigh the pros and cons there to see what, we're rolling the dice here. And I know a couple of
our generation pioneered prophylaxis, number one. So it wasn't even available when we were younger. The medicines were too expensive. So we only used
the supply wasn't available.
And it wasn't just human drive, so they didn't have as
make it fast enough.
Yeah, so I mean that's a big hurdle that we had to go over. But yeah, I mean with the price of factor and everything else, it's just was preventative and availability for us to get the care we needed. And now we've learned so much more over these years, but the damage has already been done for us. Now, mind you, with being an advocate for prophylaxis and getting factor early and as often as possible, we're leading the next generation to living a more full, quote unquote, normal life. But, it wasn't the case for us, and we've lived through it. But I think a lot of people can definitely learn, hey, you're lucky. Take advantage of the things that are available for you today, because, going back in time, I wish my ankles felt better than they do right now. I tell you that right now. And what we don't realize is that, it's not, we didn't fall off a cliff and injure ourselves. I mean, my ankle started from me just walking on the treadmill every single day.
Wrong.
And I was walking every single day, just trying to be fit, trying to get my weight to a lower level. And one day, one step just didn't feel right. And that was 7 years ago. And to this day, I'm still not the same. I still can't put too much load on that one ankle.
You're faster than me, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Upside.
Yeah. But yeah,
well, it's all in context, right?
Yeah, but with Hope, I know you do a prophy conference every year. I know myself, if I meet younger individuals in that are affected, I definitely always tell the parents, like, infuse, make sure they have prophylaxis, make sure that they have everything they need, whether they need a port or the parents need to learn how to stick them, or they have a great support staff at whichever hospital they choose. But they need to make sure they get the medicines in early and often.
Yeah, I'm a hypocrite for saying this, but like, stick to the schedule. Yeah. Because I know it's great to think that this generation right now, I'm hearing like they don't even know what it's like to have a breakthrough bleed. That's an incredible thing that I would have never thought we would hear.
Kind of jealous.
So like, yeah, but it's an awesome thing. But we've already seen this where I know in college, I did not want to stick to any sort of a prophylactic schedule. I did it on demand as I needed to when I had to, and it was only on the back. It's not the way to do it. So, and I paid for that, and I still am. But I am excited about what's coming around the corner, with some of the other products. And
I think that's one of the things that we see as a real challenge, is that people don't understand the mental toll and the emotional toll that all of this plays on. I mean, we have, first of all, dealing with the fact that you're, I always used to say that hemophilia is publicly normal but privately painful. And the reason I say that is because, like, when you're alone, you're living with the weight of this pain and inflammation and constant arthritis, and you're wanting to go out, and as a kid, you're wanting to go out and play baseball with your friends in the yard, but you just can't. As a young adult, you're wanting to go and play all the sports and run the races and do all the things, and you can't. Your body's constantly telling you, like, you can't go further than this. And so even with treatment, it's like, and then the burden of treatment, right? You're learning how to do it yourself. A lot of people don't know. Again, this is just part of level setting for those of you and maybe listening that don't know what this lifestyle is like. You mentioned prophylaxis, you mentioned these things. It was just like, this is an intravenous treatment that is a blood product, largely synthetic today, that the majority of people take, but it does take an infusion. And learning how to actually, create an IV and start that IV process, we had that from kind of early age, 8, 9 years old. Most of us were trying to figure out how to do it ourselves, which is a very difficult thing to do. But as you go through the different stages of life, as teens and as college age, and even as a young adult with kids and all these things, all of those things, it's very disrupting to your personal life. So at one point in time, I questioned whether or not I should even get married, because as much as I wanted to get married in my heart, as much as I wanted to have family, I wanted to have kids, all of that, I questioned whether or not I could even bring somebody into the personal side of it, because my worst parts of my day, every single day, still, even now, the worst parts of my life are actually the bookends of every day. It's getting out of I used to always say, I know how my day's going to go based upon the first 2 steps out of the bed. I mean, it really, I can wake up and feel great. I can put my feet on the floor and stand up and go, and my ankles are done for the day already, and they're swollen and they're huge and they hurt, and it's arthritic, and I'm limping around. Sometimes I can't get around. And so it's like, that you've got that dynamic. So my mornings are rough. Sometimes I have good mornings. It's like
it's a roll of dice. Yeah.
And then the evenings, I can almost get through a day that I look and act like a normal person, and then by 6 o'clock I can't walk anymore. And so then my kids want to play, and they want to watch a movie, and they want to whatever, and I got to figure out dinner and helping around with laundry and the chores and stuff. And it's like, and so I questioned whether or not I could even participate in that, because the worst parts of me were going to be on the times where it was my only times to be with my family. So that's very emotionally difficult. So we ask ourselves questions, and we wrestle with these things of suicide is a real thing. I think we probably, if we're honest, we've all had suicidal thoughts at some point in time, but throughout the community, throughout the people that are living with a diagnosis like this, at Hope, we put a lot of emphasis on mental health, mostly because there is so much pressure that goes on inside of us from a mental and emotional point of view that really doesn't have anything to do with just the medical, clinical side. You can talk about these things in isolation as if, if we just treat more often and preventatively, then everything's okay. Well, you're not accounting for all the damage that's already been done, number one, and you're going to have to deal with the ramifications of that. Simultaneously, you haven't addressed the psychosocial side at all, which has a huge impact on whether or not this person's even going to treat themselves properly because they feel so discouraged.
Yeah.
And how do we as individuals, but also, handle that ourselves? But I think the three of us at least have come to a place where we're like, man, our support system mattered so much.
Yeah.
It was all of us have a very similar path. Your family had played a huge role in you being able to stay on the course. Your family had a huge role in you being able to stay the course. My family had a huge role in me being able to stay. But then we get to realize and start to meet these other patients in the community and realize there's a lot of people out there that don't have that support system we had. Yeah. I would say more than half. Yes. They don't have the support systems that we were blessed with. And so then we get together and learn from each other and go, oh my gosh, like, Stephen, you've taught me things over the years that I didn't, little tips and tricks that it was like improve my health, improve my life. I know that, we've talked
like you learned something.
I pretend like I've learned something from you. I'm sure I have. I'm trying to recall at the moment. No, you really have. I mean, but even if it's nothing more than just being able to call each other up and go, man, today sucks.
Yeah.
And then we can move on and actually talk about real life.
The sounding board.
But it's like, you're right. Okay, man, I feel you.
But what's crazy is that you're going over all the things that's going on in your mind and in your life. And I'm like, you're telling my story right now. It's amazing how similar. Like we're, 100 miles apart, but our lives are so similar. Like I have the elbow problems, I have the ankle problems. I totally, when you said that, you know how your day is going to go when you get out of bed. I mean, I live that. I get out of bed like, ow, it hurts today. Right. And I some days I work and it's like, and I don't know what happens. You're 3 to 6 hours into your shift, and all of a sudden you're like, oh nope, I'm done. That ankle, let me elevate it or something.
Drag it. That's the rest of the
day. Exactly. So I mean, it was amazing hearing that from you. It's like, wait, that's my life. But that's where these organizations, whether it's which I name the organization, whether it's Hope, LHF, or it's a pharmacy or anything else, we know what you're going through. We're living the same thing. I mean, we can have this conversation, realize like, wow, we're so much in common. And well, this is how I work through it. And maybe this will help you. And whether that's through prayer or forward them to a doctor that you've used with good results or whatever it may be, it's like, hey, we walk through your shoes. Let us help you find the way, so.
The right kind of Band-Aids, or if you have latex allergies or something like that. Sometimes there's little bitty nuances. It might seem like a small detail to some people, but for us, it's like, you have no idea. I got my life back because I use this kind of Band-Aid, or in my case, I don't use a Band-Aid at all. And they're like, what?
The right type of gauze?
Yeah.
The right type of gauze. Seriously.
Some people like the nice plush gauze, and I get it because I was given some cheesecloth before, and, my hand was red after I was holding it down, so I didn't want to use that one ever again. I wrote that name down.
So, random question. So I was 12 when I started self-infusing at home consistently, which was even then a fight against myself in different ways. How old were you when you started you were young?
So I was 10. It was after camp one year. One of the nurse at the HTC was like, you know what? You seem mature enough to stick yourself. Come by the Hemophilia Center, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. So they give me this maybe 6-page pamphlet, go in a 45, hit the vein, level out, and go back in kind of deal. And they put out a fake arm, and I stick it, but I guess there wasn't enough funding or whatnot. They didn't have the fake blood to go in, so I don't know if I actually hit it. So then the amazing thing was the nurse put her hand on the table and told me to stick her. And I was like, I was scared, and it wasn't even my hand. It was like, are you crazy? You want me to stick your hand? And I blew through that vein. Trust me, I blew through that vein, and I saw it bruise immediately. And then they gave me a fresh needle. It was like, stick yourself. Wow. But yeah, so it was a big mental block. But yeah, I was only 10. And to be honest with you, even though I learned how to do it at 10, I only did it in emergencies where my parents did not have the time to do it. I didn't have time to go to the HTC, and if I was at home alone or home with my siblings, I would stick myself. But most of the time, I would wait for my mom to get home.
Wow. You're super advanced because I was way more stubborn than that.
No. Like I said, I would wait till my mom got home, and that pretty much lasted to high school.
Was your mom your sticker too? Did she stick you, or was it your dad?
It was only my dad, but I mean, yeah.
So I had this weird thing, like growing up, but I would not let my dad near a needle. Like, for whatever reason, he terrified me with a needle in his hand. My mom was like gentle and like, okay, we're going to do this. And So she was like, she took it on and she was like, we're going to do this. And she did it. My dad would do these Lamaze things in my face where he would like blow. And he's like, son, just do like this. It's like,
just trying to find anything to like.
He'd have like coffee breath or something. And I'm just like, oh, face. Like, but it was very painful for me to get stuck. I mean, I was notorious for like, they had to strap me down to the table when I was super little. And like, I had lots of childhood trauma over just like, all of those events. And, but I started self-infusing when I was 8, and don't ask me to revisit that story because it was a traumatic event. I was also at camp, and I love camp. Camp has really helped so many people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have a great camp story, but I was telling somebody recently, they asked me if I would come to speak at their camp thing, and I was like, man, I'd love to, but I feel like I need to be a counselor first or something to just like redeem my camp experience because I didn't have a good one. But yeah, I think learning at a young age is something that most people cannot fathom setting an IV on their own as a child. I mean, 8 years old is a child, that's a child.
Adults that are not affected. Every single adult, like you place it. I've met doctors like, I would not be able to place that myself.
Right.
They'll do it to other people because they can't feel it, but they would not do themselves.
Right.
And
which makes sense. Apprehension to doing it to other people, like you were talking about. Like I'm like, I don't know if I would do that.
But that makes sense because that means like every time I've gone in when they can't find it, that's why they keep moving it around so much because they don't know what that feels like.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. So this is another random question here, but what's the most times you've ever been stuck in one like occurrence to try to get a vein?
Okay, I know that one.
What's your highest count?
Is 8.
8 times.
So that was like my lowest point too when I was.
So for mine, I tried 11 times, and between me and my mom, and then after the 11th time, my mom put the factor in a little Ziploc bag, and we went to the local emergency room and asked if someone was willing to stick me. And it was the first time ever their nurse at the local hospital was like, "Put your foot on the table." I was like, wait, I was told we can't stick your leg.
There's a band.
Like, right. No, they did it right, like at the ankle.
Yeah, that's on top of top of all it.
Well, I was taught, I think that it's a high risk of infection, I guess, because, it's in your sock, it's lower extremity, things of that nature, blood return. But that's what they did. And,
I've had a few on my feet, and I'm telling you, I swear, I think I'm just sensitive though. Like I'm like, don't go anywhere near. If I was in the hospital right now and they were like, we're going to have to stick you in your foot, I'm like, I'm out. I just could not. But yeah, 11 times was my high point too. And I that was just opposite to my life. We could be twins. We look the same. We act the same. We have the same background. It's amazing. No, but that kind of like, people talk about, and I use the term jokingly, people go to like a snowflake, because they've never been through any trauma. But like, there's all these people in these, millennials and all this stuff. It's like people get so like their feathers ruffled over the simplest things, and you don't understand. Like I'm trying to open my mind up to. I kind of grew up. My dad was old school. Your dad's kind of like this dude's like, pick your stuff up by your bootstraps. Now he was super kind and very, compassionate towards my circumstances as a kid. Matter of fact, I really believe. I think he would say this, that there was a kindness that he was able to grow in actually, and his compassion actually within himself expanded because he saw the torment that I went through. My dad tells stories of how like when I was young, I would like go to sleep at night and I would be dealing with a major bleed. And again, it was that question of like, do we take him to the hospital? Do we not? Because most of this was treated in the hospital when we were super young. And so home infusion didn't even become a thing, I don't think, until I was probably 10. But, commonly, at least for us, and I lived in Texas at the time, which was different too. But we, at the time, I mean, it was this, do we go now? Do we go later? And then you're like, well, it's a Friday. No one's going to be there. It's Friday night at 5. I always got every bleed happened at Friday at 5 o'clock, And so then you're like, okay, well, we can't go because nobody's there. If we do go, they're going to bring the on-call people in, and I'm going to be there for 2 days, and it's just kind of overnight. It's going to be a terrible thing. It wasn't simple. And so you go, well, we'll just try to wait it through. And then by Saturday night, like I'm in just a ball of tears, like continuously, and so and we didn't have pain medicine to control other than maybe like I was lucky if I got a Tylenol kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. more trauma. Yeah.
I got the best one there.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the point is that I didn't realize, and I probably need therapy, like professional.
Oh, no, we do.
Therapy.
No, there's no.
No, definitely.
Yeah, that was true.
But like, I didn't realize like how much trauma each one of those things really did cause that continued to fold into my life in such a way where it became the fabric of who I was, that, those things really, like, in a very developmental stage of my life, caused certain things to occur that I start avoiding things, I start dodging, I start, even relationally, I don't want to tell my parents when I have a bleed, and so I hide that. Well, you start, those things trickle over into lots of other places in your life, and you go, oh my gosh, like but it's not all negative. Like, some of those things also are what made me so strong as an individual. It's what empowered me to be able to stand up to things that other people go, I could never handle that. Like doing an IV. I mean, people tell me that all the time. I could never do that. And I'm like,
you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Which you can figure out when you have to.
When you have to, you have to.
I mean, it motivated me to pick my career path. So, I mean, it does give some gifts. But another thing that you touched on that people don't realize, that, like you were saying, the inconvenience of when can you get the shot done is Friday and whatnot. The toll it takes on whether the parents or the patient themselves on missed work days. How do you schedule that? Because I'm the one that's affected, but my mom's the one that has to take off of work.
Right.
How do we manage that? So in reality, my parents, they own their own businesses, and they ran the businesses. They cooked there. They own restaurants, and they weren't able to take off. So luckily, since the Tulane Hemophilia Center was close to my mom's restaurant, I would just skip school that day, go to my mom's restaurant, and back in the 80s and early 90s, it was a different world. I can walk myself to the hospital, and the nurse would give me my infusion. I do it like after rounds at like 3 p.m., 3:30.
Back in the good old days.
Now, nowadays, you might get kidnapped. The hospital won't take you in because you don't have, a parent with you, things of that nature. But I was very, very fortunate at that. But I mean, how many parents today, if you're getting 2, 3, 4 bleeds a month, will the employers put up with that? It's like, hey, I need to get off because we might be in the emergency room for 4 to 6 hours. And even on those days where I did go to emergency rooms, I mean, I remember we wouldn't get out to 2, 3 a.m. in the morning because they wouldn't get to you because you weren't really an emergency. They would just get to you when they had 20 minutes to spare to stick somebody.
Right.
And that's just like level 1 too, right? Like missing work. So I always think about it. I can't help it from my parents' perspective. Like, we talk about us having trauma. Like, how traumatized are they that they're watching their child go through this, not be able to do anything for it, and be that helpless? That's something that I can't process. Like, I can't even imagine what they actually went through throughout that whole period of time, and just kind of was that. That's why they're my heroes, and that includes like your parents, your like anybody that I'm connected to or know. I have a lot of appreciation for them being able to just survive that, much less get us through and to where we're having, as far as our quality of life goes, like having families, because most of the people that I know are struggling with even that initial thought that you had, which is, do I even want to bring somebody into this? And so I'm hoping that with the new medications and with the new therapies, they'll be able to, if they're not having breakthrough bleeds, I figure that they're not dealing with a lot of the traumas we were. So they're not dealing with that. Hopefully they're healthier, not just physically, but mentally, so they don't have to continue to go through this. But I know I did not want to feel different. I know that. I did not want to feel different.
From, like you said, about the parents having to go through that, but also another perspective is they don't really know what we're feeling. So a lot of times they think we might be overplaying it, and they don't realize how much it's actually hurting us, and that may delay therapy. And it's, walking in our shoes is difficult, because I know there's many nights I cried in my bedroom alone, and the AC kicking on would cause excruciating pain. But it's as a child, you're kind of helpless. You're at their mercy of what they're able to do. But luckily, coming from a loving, caring family that supported me every way I needed, I think I had reasonable access to care, but there's a lot of people that don't,
Well, and this brings up an interesting point about, pain. I always explain the aspects of like, what is different about, you mentioned earlier about somebody spraining their ankle. That's a good, kind of reference point for most people to understand, because everybody's probably sprained an ankle.
Yeah.
So you sprain an ankle, right? And you have that initial thing where it starts swelling and it starts getting, and then you like put ice and whatever. Well, in a day or two, that has a curvature to it to where it starts to actually start to it absorbs and it starts to sort of go away. Well, with hemophilia, a lot of people don't understand that initial thing starts a process of it swelling, but that actually never reduces it. It continues to expand and continues to expand and continues to expand beyond what you think is even humanly possible. I mean, eventually the swelling will happen so much so that the bleed, it's observed at least that in third world countries and stuff where they don't have treatment, that these bleeds will continue to go on and on and on till they get, you have a joint capsule a joint that would be like this big around, like a cantaloupe, for a little boy's knee that's only the size of a baseball. And what happens is that the blood vessels actually get so swollen that it actually it closes off the red blood vessel, the blood vessels themselves. And so what happens is that the bleeding actually will stop eventually because there's so much pooled blood in there. The pressure itself will stop, but that pressure feels like a dump truck sitting on your knee. It doesn't feel like just like a headache. It feels like
it has a life.
It starts out like a migraine, but it eventually feels like a dump truck sitting on that joint, and you just want to do anything you can to get it off. And so we all have stories of how we dealt with that. But I mean, I remember hanging my arm off the side of my bed in such a way where I could like push that pressure point so it'd make my whole arm go numb so that I couldn't feel the pain as much. As a kid, I used to sit in the bathtub, and just like hang my knee over so it cut the circulation off at the knee so that my ankle wouldn't feel. Now, that only works for a little bit, and then eventually, like, you let go of that pressure point, and it comes back with a vengeance, But for just about 15 minutes, you can get a little bit of, relief, and you're just doing anything you can to try to get relief. And a lot of times, those types of happenings over and over and over again eventually become to the point where your joint is so damaged and destroyed that you have to have surgery. And we've all had corrective surgeries here, but I've had 10 major joint surgeries I'm walking today. You mentioned I was in a wheelchair once upon a time. I'm walking today quite literally because of surgeries that were able to help get me back upright. But they took a tremendous amount of healing, and it was interruptive. You talk about losing days at work, and in my case, and you kind of alluded to this, which is how Hope got started originally,
right?
Was we actually, was in a situation where I ended up in a wheelchair for 2.5 years. I was not able to go to work. I was not able to do normal life things that I had done leading up to that. And as a result of that, I went actually 21 months without a single W-2 paycheck. And, I was a financial planner. I was involved I was a financial advisor, and I gave people advice on how to save for their long-term things. And I had taken my own advice, and I had 6 months of savings set aside. But 21 months is longer than 6 months. And so even if you're not good at math, you should be able to follow that. Yeah. But anyway, at a certain point, we got behind on our house. We got behind on, everything started to just crumble around it. You don't realize how fragile life is until you're in one of those situations where you literally cannot keep yourself afloat anymore. Yeah. And at a certain point, you either decide between going without your medications. Some people take their own lives in those circumstances. Yeah. I remember at one point in the middle of that telling my wife I was on medical leave from my company, and I told my wife, I said, I still had life insurance, and I was like, I'm literally worth more dead than alive right now. I'm more a benefit to you if I just check out than I am if I stay. Yeah. And it was very, it was guttural. It just rips you of everything that you feel, that makes you human. And so in that process, though, I had people that would just show up to our doorstep, and our community found out, and they would, some lady just, it's weird talking about it. There's like a lady who'd show up and offer to do laundry. We've never met before. I had, crazy weirdos like you show up and be like, hey, I'm like, look out the window, and there's, Josh mowing grass and pulling weeds and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, what in the world? How is all this going on? And we had people that would pull up to the mailbox and take a bill out and pay it before we had a chance to even open the mail. And it was the most humbling experience that we'd ever been through too. And there was a lot of, that's all the good things. There's a lot of negative things that also happened too. But the point is that we couldn't sustain ourselves without some sort of outside support. And it wasn't the people who actually understood what we were going through for the most part that helped us. It was the people who had the biggest compassion for what we were going through that actually helped us. And we felt like if we could make those two things coincide somehow, where we could say, well, there's people who know, there's people who don't know. If we could create a space actually to be able to raise money to help people that were going through these things that needed outside help. They were beyond a point where they could. It's not trying to help people that can help themselves. We're trying to help people that cannot help themselves. And getting to that place where we could say, okay, there's a way for us to be able to jump into the fight with them that they're fighting, and let them know that they're not alone in the middle of that. In the middle of that war that's going on for them physically, emotionally, spiritually. Everything is feeling like they are worthless. And to be able to come in and say, no, you have value, you have purpose, you have a destiny, you have, this is temporary. The one thing that I'm grateful for and in so many ways that distinguishes us and our community, people with bleeding disorders and a lot of different chronic diseases compared to something that might be more, it's not terminal. As long as you can get access to medication, for the most part, it is something that can be managed as long as you can get access to that medication. And if you can get access to the medication part is, as we all know, can be incredibly difficult to maintain. That maintenance thing, that maintenance word sounds small, but it can be almost impossible at times. And so we have developed an organization today now that we have a team of amazing people. We have 12 people on staff that help people navigate various different types of circumstances and in the middle of the crisis to try to find resources and do the research for them. Because a lot of times when you're in the middle of all that, you don't have you're doing everything you can just to like exist and feed your family and just to like make sure that survive. And so what we do is we take the burden of all that research and all the burden of trying to help them find the necessary resources to stay alive. So we help connect them to plethora of programs out there that can help them with maybe a deductible, or can help them with their health insurance premiums, or that can help them with we'll help people with a house note or a car payment or something like that to help them bridge a gap. And so, people a lot of times avoid programs like ours because they think, well, they avoid supporting them. Let me say it that way, because they think, well, aren't you just helping the same people over and over and over again? I could tell you, without a doubt, we are not. It is crazy how many people, but there's so many people that need a hand up. They don't need a handout. They're not, matter of fact, most of the time, the hardest time, the people that we serve, they're probably the biggest success stories are people that didn't even want to ask for help. I didn't want to ask for help. It took people like you and like others coming into my life going, no, like, dude, you're drowning. Let me throw you a life vest. And I'm going, you're just trying to survive. And it takes people from the outside looking in to be able to go and say, and so that's what we do as an organization. And I'm so grateful that we get to do it because we understand. We know what it's like to go through that, and so we're building a consistent, reputable, integrous stream of processes that actually help make certain that people can get the funding that they need when they need it most without all the red tape. We're here to cut the red tape to get people the resources they need it when they need it most. And we're doing it systematically, and we're doing it in repetition, but we're doing it not for the same people over and over and over again. We're doing it for the people who need it. And sometimes it's very random. So in a person's lifetime, they may only need that help one time. But there are other people that go through, we call it a season of crisis. We define that as 90 days. We might be able to help pay somebody's bill for up to 3 months because we know that it's not something that just sometimes is a one-time thing. It's not a one and done deal. A lot of times these people are coming to us, they're already 3 months behind before they even come to us. And so we're helping to resource those people and get them the help and the services they need.
Get back on their feet.
And get them back on their feet, because a lot of times, thankfully, especially, and this is true, there's something like 72 million different people affected by a rare disease in the United States. I mean, it's almost a third of the country is affected by something that's rare. I mean, if you take that just by itself, most of those things are things that are not terminal. And so what can we do for those people that potentially have a long life ahead of them? We can jump in there and we can roll up our sleeves and we can jump into the fight with them and say, you know what? We're not here to solve everybody's financial problems. We can't do that. I can't even solve all my own financial problems. But what I can do, though, is I can help give you a cold glass of water in the middle of your fire that you are suffering in. And I can say, you know what? Tomorrow's going to be a better day.
Yeah.
We're going to be here with you in it until we can get through it.
And when you think about the circumstances too, because you're the perfect example to start that whole thing on, because you did everything like as far as foundationally right. You had a support group. You had an amazing wife, amazing kids. You had people that cared about you from the outside. You had a solid job and career.
Right.
Like everything that you did, you had 6 months of additional. That's not normal for people to have.
Right.
Like everything was right, but that crisis hits and then it's like your legs literally got cut out from underneath you.
Absolutely.
So I think that could happen to anybody. And that's what's so amazing about what Hope's doing. So,
but not only that, you brought up that you had the crisis and someone came to cut your grass and someone came to help laundry. I can't tell you how many times I've been blessed and graced with God's presence that, you know, people came into my lives out of the blue that I wasn't expecting, and I can only give it up to God's grace, you know. And it's kind of like, well, you know what? Hope's kind of doing God's work. It's not, your neighbor doesn't necessarily have to do it. There's companies out there that are out there to genuinely help people when they're in times of need. So sometimes maybe if you don't find the time to do it yourself, maybe help other people do it for you.
Yeah.
You know, that's a good idea. But it's, you know, it's just one of those things where I know many times that whether it's suffering through a bleed or whether I had a car accident where I wasn't able to do things, I had a similar situation. I had a friend come to my house and pull my weeds. Wow. Like that's a good friend, you know, and I can't expect that from everyone, but the only thing I can chalk it up to is like, I'm very blessed to have these people in my life.
It's so true. And I would say also that 90% of the people that we serve don't have even family to support them.
Right.
Like, I mean, you know, usually it's family that you start there with. I mean, the people that are blessed to have friendships like you and I have, and we've all had friends like that came in and did some of this, you're just going, oh my gosh. And what does that do for you? It makes you want, first of all, it's so humbling. It's almost embarrassing that you have to have that habit or that you're in that situation.
Yeah.
But if you can get through that, right? And those people are usually good about helping you get through that. But you get through that. On the other side of that problem, the moment you have a little bit of energy, it makes you start looking for what can I do in somebody else's life to help them in the same way. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That's why Hope is here.
Yeah.
It's just because we started saying, what can we do to help? We were given such a beautiful gift and such an amazing thing in the middle of our biggest trial. How can we now give that back away? And so we're, you know, the statement like pay it forward is kind of cliche in a way, but in a way it's like, I don't want to just pay it forward. I want to pay it forever forward.
Exponentially.
I want to keep, and if we could organize it in such a way, I mean, you've seen some of the stuff in the inner workings of how Hope works, but we actually have a tiering system that we process that we modeled after triage in the hospital and the emergency room, to help be able to identify where the needs are and which ones should have priority and so on. Because there's never really enough money to go around to help every single request that comes in. If they get onto our website and they make a donation, let's say they give $25 on our website to go help a family in need. Do you know that 100% of that $25 goes directly into that program to go help the family in need? We don't take one single dime. Matter of fact, we take it a step further. We actually get charged a 2.9% interest on the credit card transaction plus 30 cents. Keep that in there. That we actually take from our other funding sources. We get grants and we have some funding that covers our overhead. So we take out of our budget that's already been allocated for all of our our overhead costs and administrative costs. We take out of that budget, we go and we reimburse that credit card processing fee back so that full 100% of that donation can go directly into helping the patient that's in need. And our goal in this has been is that if the intent of the giver is actually matched with the intent with the need of the receiver, then the intended purpose will be accomplished exponentially. Mm-hmm. But if there's some sort of lack of integrity in that, then it really can erode at the source.
I think it can destroy everything, right?
Absolutely.
whole foundation is built on the fact that people can trust you enough to be able to give you funds to be able to rotate that over. And that's what I want to say thank you to, because at one point in time I was part of the organization, but watching how the infrastructure was laid out and then seeing all those committee members and all the stuff walking through the tier system and evaluating, and thank you guys, because that is such an incredible volunteer to be able to walk through that, listen to it. It's traumatizing in of its own, because you're hearing real people, not numbers, like real needs in dire situations where they have such an incredible, like, I don't know. I've had so many blessings in my life, but my relationships are everything to me. So like, more than money, like I care by far, and it's not a lot of people. I wish it was more, but they are out there where there's people that just want to give and don't expect anything in return.
Yeah.
And there's so many of those people connected to your group. And so that was, I know for me, just being a volunteer for a little while, I don't feel like I contributed very much because I just listened, but watching everybody work and operate is pretty amazing, like what you're doing, but also how you're growing. So it wasn't that long ago that it was you in a garage behind the house trying to, and now you'll have nice office, like you're building, but the money's going where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And it's going back to the people and patients that are in those horrible circumstances sometimes that need it, that are getting it.
Well, I've always been a fan of substance over form. I want there to be more valuable things that are going on internally than maybe what's, and look, I like things to look good too. I mean, we worked hard to make our website look decent, we worked hard to, but we did it ourselves so that we could try to save the money there,
right,
to put the money back into the patient resources. And so we've continued to do a lot of things like that. And there's a lot of reasons why I'm sort of, I know a lot of nonprofits that are far larger than us. I mean, 10 times bigger than us that have only been around for 10 years, and we've been here for 14 years and still relatively small and still trying to do, but we've been really focused on continuing to build the substance. And that's been very difficult, but it has been due to the people. You said it, you hit the nail on the head. We have built this thing off of people who have a generous spirit and have a generous heart that want to see this thing to be able to really do what the mission is, which is to be a resource to people who are going through crisis. And it's not really anyone's fault or anything, but like if you have like in one state, for instance, I'll give Louisiana as an example because we're here. We serve people as an organization in all 50 states, but let's say, for instance, we have 300 or so, maybe 400 people in the state that are diagnosed with, say, a hemophilia diagnosis. Okay. So, I'm giving roundabout numbers here, but say 300 to 500 max. Okay. You may only have one or two families in the whole state within a given 12-month period that may go through this type of medical crisis, right? There are people who are managing on their own. They've got some ups and downs. We can help all those people that are going through the ups and downs too. But the people who are in the real dire medical crisis situation, we only have one or two. Well, what we learned was you can't really get good at something unless you have repetition of trying to work through these challenges, on a repetitive basis, which is why we expanded to all 50 states, because we said, you know what, we might could get 300-400 people that, a year that we could see if we're helping reach a broader geography. And so we started doing that. And, now we're processing, 150 plus applications a month, but seeing 500-600 new families a year, easy, just in bleeding disorders alone, that we're trying to work through to try to help them, navigate this plethora of this matrix of challenges, whether it's through health insurance issues or out-of-pocket costs, or whether it's just a house note or utility bill or communication issues. You'd be surprised how many homeless people we deal with every single year. I mean, you think hemophilia is hard. It's hard. It's hard for me, and I had an amazing family with great resources, with tons of friendships, incredible community, a great church. I had all the things that you would hope for, and I was in financial planning and had some sort of wherewithal to know how to, support myself. And even with all that, I still came to a place where it was crushing and impossible for me to manage on my own. So if that's true, then what are about the people who are below middle class to start with and have no family support and all this, you'd be amazed how many people that we help year over year that are in homeless situations. I always say hemophilia is hard by itself, but you try to compare, compound hemophilia with homelessness, it's impossible. It's impossible.
Or your factor.
You don't have a place to even get factor delivered to.
Yeah.
And a lot of people may not know this, but like if you're listening to this and you don't have framework to what this world is like, hemophilia is treated in the home. We could go to any hospital around the and may not even be able to get one treatment at the hospitals that are even in the state because it's too expensive for the hospitals to carry. So it's more dangerous. I always tell, our friends, it's like, look, if I'm in a car accident, I don't care if my arm is severed off or whatever, but just take me straight home because it's safer for me to be at home than it is for me to go to the emergency room because they're not going to have what I need. And so at the end of the day, whenever the hospital is the home becomes a critical piece keeping that person whole and alive, it's healthy. And when you take that away, then all of a sudden your life is at risk. And I know that seems like that would be the same with homelessness, but it is impossible for someone with hemophilia to be homeless. And so we help people all the time get into Section 8 housing, get them into a circumstance where there's resource. There are organizations out there that don't care what disease you have. They don't care what kind of diagnosis you have. It's not medical, but they would help you get into housing if they would just, and so we've helped people all kinds of things.
Yeah, let me say, but you diversified because it was Hope for Hemophilia. That changed to Hope Charities just because of that simple fact, right? So what are some of the other areas that you guys are helping in right now as far as?
Great question. So we do help with a lot of other pretty much all of the bleeding disorders we support, but we also help with other diseases like hereditary angioedema, primary immune deficiency, CVID. There's about a list of about 10 other diseases you can find on our website that actually we help with some direct programming in some form or fashion.
And it's Hope Charities in our head. When we see the word charities, we think you're just giving out money, but you gotta realize you do so much more because you spend a lot of resources in all the different programs that you have, whether it's from education, the events to help build community. But beyond that, like for instance, I know for myself, I never saw myself in the shoes that I'm in right now because in my head, I always thought I had to work for a big company so I can get insurance through them because I couldn't afford private insurance. But one day you reached out to me and you were able to find me like a resource, someone I can talk to find me a decent plan. And it totally changed my life because at the end of the day, now I realize, wait, I can get private insurance. I'm not stuck to the chains because, there's a mass exodus going on with the chains and I'm happy I was able to get out when I was able to, but I wouldn't have been able without the help of someone like yourself that's going to be able to guide other people in the same shoes and realize, no, there's help available. How about you speak to these people? Or how about, you have all those, whether it's someone to help with crisis, someone to help with financial crisis, someone to help out with education. You have all those things that you offer. And a lot of people don't realize that when they see the word charity,
The insurance alone is massive, right? So walking that tightrope of don't lean in a certain direction because if they don't like the way you lean, it doesn't matter if you fall or not. They're just going to cut you.
Yeah. That's true.
So
and it's getting more and more and more and more complex. We had not done a lot of, we kind of like the one piece that you see among nonprofits that work in patient advocacy, if you will, a lot of times they're doing some level of political, they're engaged in political advocacy. We've kind of steered away from that historically just because, first of all, there's a lot of great organizations that are out there that are doing great work with that space, but the insurance thing is continuing to get compoundingly difficult in its complexities, which is, it sounds ridiculous to say that because health insurance has always been a difficult thing for a lot of folks, but we have increasingly seen, just this year alone, we've seen a huge shift for employer plans promoting this idea of excluding hemophilia entirely.
Wow.
As a to where you cannot get hemophilia medications on your plan. But intentionally going out of their way to exclude. Now ERISA allows some of these things to happen. It was not designed for specialty drugs. ERISA laws were not originally designed for that. But we're trying to understand how is it that this is being allowed, because we have patients all over the country now that all of a sudden are going, how am I going to get medication, period? Because I have this job, but my job changed the way that their employee benefits are, and now they exclude hemophilia? Now they exclude cancer? They're starting to exclude entire, buckets, and it was allowed to have it. So now you got to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, wait a minute, wait. I thought we had affordable healthcare now. I thought we had the marketplace plans. I thought we had this. And there are some of those solutions, but guess what? You can't get a marketplace plan if your employer provides health insurance. Well, if your employer provides health insurance, but they don't provide coverage for your pharmacy benefits that you need for that specific medication or whatever the coverage, do you effectively have health insurance? We don't know. We don't know the answer to that. So we're starting to get in another way, starting to advocate more and more and more for patients' rights as it pertains to them being able to access their life-saving medications. If they're insured, but they cannot get access to the medications that they depend on for their livelihood, then something's wrong with that. Something's wrong with that system. And so, we've been doing a lot more. I've been to DC a few times this year, planning to go back again here in another month or so, but there's a lot of activity starting to happen around how do we advocate for the patient's rights for choice, where they get their medications, what the physicians that they go to. We have every single year, this has been going on for probably 4 or 5 years now, where patients are having to choose to say, well, if I choose this insurance plan, even on the marketplace, it'll cover my doctor, but if I get on this insurance plan, it'll cover my drug. But I can't have both.
Wow.
So which one do I do? So we're seeing patients now choosing their drug over their doctor, and then they can't even go to the doctor that is needed to prescribe the medication for what they need. And so they're caught between this middle thing. And so insurance companies are constantly wrestling with how do they become more profitable and how do they maintain their profitability. And at the end of the day, we're putting the lives of an already vulnerable population at more risk. The patients are the ones at the end of that chain that actually end up suffering. And our question is, how many of these people have to suffer more before change is actually, brought to light? So we're getting really involved in even the political advocacy side of it as well.
Yeah, I think that topic in general needs more light shined upon it, because for the healthy, that's things that they overlook. But in reality is for unhealthy like ourselves, I just remember the stress of my parents owning their own business and the stress to get private insurance and to pay for it. I wouldn't say my dad had dangled it over my head, but it was definitely known that, he's working those 14-hour days for a reason, because he needed to make enough to insure us and make sure that I can get my medicine and see the doctors I need. But even myself as an adult, I've been a pharmacist for 15 years, just seeing how insurance changed and having to educate myself on insurance, because a lot of people, they don't educate themselves on insurance. I didn't know what an out-of-pocket max was. I didn't know what a lifetime cap was when I graduated college. I didn't know any of these things. And I realized, wait a minute. So when I was working for a big major chain, I had a $2 million lifetime cap on my medicine. That's less than 5 years of my factor. So if I stayed with that company for 10 years, so what's going to happen after 5? Are they still going to pay my medicine? It's going to be, luckily things have changed, but as they've changed, my deductibles have gone up, my premiums have gone up, prior authorizations, the amount of drugs that I need them are through the roof. The insurance companies are kind of, they're in business to stay in business, but at the same time it seems like more and more their business is not healthcare. Their business is more, if anything, preventing people from healthcare. It's sad, but it's one of those things that now as an adult, I know how to navigate through it. I know how to pick a plan. I understand that, and it's almost, there should be an education lesson on that alone. But, it's just...
Well, we've talked about this a lot too, is a lot of times the people that are making those decisions are on these internal medical review boards. But did you have a hemophilia treatment center doctor that's a hematologist that understands hemophilia, has been trained thoroughly on hemophilia, actually help you define those policies for your health insurance company? No, almost exclusively no. And so they take, these liberal policies that say, well, there's 5 drugs, and we're just going to, they're all FDA labeled for hemophilia, so we're just going to, you can only take this one. Well, the problem with that is that not every drug works the same for people. And currently in the state of affairs is how the portfolio of products that are available, every single one of those products works pretty different from each other. They're not all the same. Now, once upon a time, they used to be very similar. Now they're not. And so there's 26 drugs on the market. You got to be able to take one of them, but one of them acts very drastically different than the other. And so, and not to mention the fact that you might get, one person that it works great for. You might take the person next to you.
If someone has an inhibitor and you start to limit we have some real problems at that point.
Absolutely.
Life problems.
Well, so, and to your point though, about you have uneducated, very educated people, but uneducated about hemophilia specifically, who are making decisions at the payer level about our livelihood and saying that it's covered when it's not really covered. And that's putting our community at risk, it's putting our life, but it's definitely putting our quality of life at risk. At the very least, you want to talk about health care, there's no care involved. You should not even, I'm not even sure you can't even quantify that as making certain that someone's life is sustained over a long period of time, because they're barely, that product or that, service may not have even been approved by somebody who actually understands what the disease itself is.
Yeah, but to piggyback on that, of people making health decisions, and I'm not a pro single payer system at all, but at the same time is being in this community for the past few years and actually being active in it, because I took a very laid back approach to it, but now I'm a lot more active in the community. I've been reached out to by people from other countries like Brazil and from Iraq and whatnot, and they're telling me that they're in a single payer system where the government will only buy one type of factor, and that's all they're going to buy, and they ration it out. Yeah. So one guy is on the same factor I'm on. He was on Benefix at the time, and that's when I used to be on it. And I asked him his weight, I asked him everything. We were roughly the same size, and my dose in America back then was 6,000 units, and he was only getting 1,500 units 3 times a month. 3 doses a month. They ration as a severe hemophilia B.
And you needed 3 times a week, right?
And I was doing it twice a week.
Yeah.
At 6,000 units.
So you may want to talk about the ratio difference too for people that don't understand between the mild, moderate, and severe. So severe meaning 0% clotting.
Yeah, less than 1%.
Less than 1%. Yeah. As far as the other ones go, do you know offhand what those numbers are?
Yeah, so the milds are above 5%.
What the actual line
milds are between 2 and 5%. But it's just one of those things where, yes, we have different severity levels, but he was a severe. But let's take the severity level out of it. I was speaking to the person that's in Brazil, and they only have human factor. We haven't used some people still use human factor, but we rarely do it just because the blood-borne pathogens.
So it's all plasma derived?
Yeah, it's all plasma derived over in Brazil. And, every now and then on my social media, I might post a picture of my Instagram and a picture of me giving myself Idelvion. And she'll comment like, I dream of that medicine. And it's crazy to think that, their government is choosing their health outcomes. In the United States, we have our insurance companies choose that. But in reality is that, we need to take more control of our health outcomes, because we're leaving it to these people and they're not walking our shoes. They're not walking the day in our shoes. They don't understand what we're going through. All they see is dollars. They're saying, well, that one costs 3 times as much as the other one. But they don't see the outcomes that, hey, that more expensive one totally changed my life. It made me have a more full life. I could be crippled.
Prevented bleeds. This is the other thing too, is that I don't think what people, understand is even in the clinical level, there's a big difference between taking someone who has had bleeds. Remember we said earlier that if you've had one bleed, it causes a change in the structure within the joint itself, and the joint will never be the same again as a reason of one bleed. Most of these people in these scenarios, like in Brazil, for instance, most of them, if they have a diagnosis of hemophilia, they have already had numerous bleeds. Most of them have had numerous bleeds in their lifetime. They're getting a little bit of product. And the problem is that they're still having inflammation, joint damage, everything. What most people don't understand is, having chronic arthritis from a bleeding disorder like that causes severe pain, but also shortens your lifespan. You end up with, these problems for a long period of time, and it has a direct effect to how long your quality of life is. You may only be able to work until you're 30 because you're so crippled that you're 85 years old when you're 30, and you can't hold a job anymore. And so you might still be breathing, But by the time you're what, 55, you're passing away from damage on your other organs because it's caused so much with your blood pressure. It's caused so much damage with your heart.
It's a snowball effect.
It's a snowball effect.
And mental health.
Everything. And your mental health.
It's a whole different animal.
I know growing up,
You're dependent on everyone around you to carry you through that. If you don't have that, you just die. You just have a bleed and you just die.
well, I know growing up, we had a neighbor that had severe arthritis, where to the point where I assume his ankles are similar to mine now, where it's just some days you cannot walk.
Right.
And he took his own life. So it's like, well, he lived a full life. He was probably in his 80s when he did it. But think about how many people are in our shoes where we're disabled in our 30s or 40s. What mental things they're going through, because he's lived a full life. He was maybe already waiting, knowing that his day was to come. It just came a little sooner. But for us, it's like we should still have decades left. But just due to the pain and the anguish of just living the life and like, hey, I can't do this. If I can't do this, I can't provide for my family. What good am I? You get these thoughts, and unfortunately, mental health is a big factor, and access to our medicine affects it greatly because, maybe we could delay any of these crippling disabilities if we were to be able to access appropriate care and not have other people play with our lives.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and again, what happens in these jobs, these roles of these people that are medical advisors and they're on these boards and stuff and these committees that help make a lot of these policy decisions, these people are looking at 300 drugs and they're trying to make a decision for each one of them and how they're gonna go through. And so what they don't take into account is the longevity of our life. They're trying to get through the next 5 years, 10 years, maybe 15 years of their business cycle. Our lifelong hope is that we'd be here for 75 plus years. So, by the time we get down the road 10 years, they got another round of committee members making another round of decisions. Every 5 years, these things change, and they're not changing for the better. They've continued to get worse. Matter of fact, since ACA was established, I don't remember the exact number, but it's over 400% increase in out-of-pocket costs for the American public. I'm talking about out of our paycheck.
No, absolutely.
400% increase out of our paycheck since the Affordable Health Care Act was.
Yeah. To be honest about that, though, look, I cannot be more grateful for the country that we were born into because we hit the lottery in that element.
Absolutely. Right.
Like we're blessed in that way. We live in an amazing place. I'm appreciative of everyone, but at the same time, they tried to, I know for you and I both with our private insurance, they tried to basically push us out by telling us within a 32 or 33 day process at the end of the year that we couldn't get our insurance for the following year if we didn't make a multiple thousands of dollars like payment inside of that like 28 to 32 day period. They were like, you won't get insurance through us next year. It's like they were pushing us out.
Right.
So,
and that's, they don't
really catch you in between these two, like a rock and a hard place. And if you can't get help, or if you don't have, some way to come up with whatever you have to come up with, then you're out.
Yeah, that's how they kick you out without kicking you out. They just make it cost preventative.
Right.
Because I know that's what my dad did growing up. He would always tell me, he's like, that's the whole reason I went to a big chain straight out of school. And that's the whole reason I picked pharmacy. Because if I would have picked, like medicine or dental, maybe I'd work in private practice and wouldn't be able to afford insurance. But with the pharmacy, I could work for a gigantic chain and I'm just a drop in a puddle when it comes to that. But he would tell me he would pay his premium a year in advance. He'll pay up the whole year. So to prevent them from kicking him out, because what he was doing when it was going month by month, they would every few months, they're like, oh no, we can't do this and your premium is going to go this high. So we'll at least lock in a rate for a year and then the rate won't change till that year's.
Case in point is you've heard of a 30-day grace period. Do you know at most insurance companies across the country, health insurance, that the 30-day grace period is only like 21 days?
Yeah.
Like it's actually not even, they call it a 31,
Yeah.
they call it a 30-day grace period, but in most cases it's only 21 days.
Well, they kicked me off my parents' insurance.
How is that a 30-day grace period?
They kicked me off my parents' insurance when I graduated college. And the thing is, I was still enrolled in school. I didn't even walk across the stage yet. And I ordered my factor and they're like, oh, our records show that you're done with college, so we're no longer covering your factor. And here I am a week and a half out from graduation. And they denied my claim. And in my mindset was, I'll just go ahead and put in a 3-month supply before I graduate and then I'll get insurance in 90 days. Well, that didn't happen. And luckily, through the social workers and the drug company. They were able to give me a month on compassion, and most students will take a couple months off to study for their boards. I wasn't given that luxury. I started working full time. Like I graduated on Saturday, that Tuesday, I started working 40 hours a week just to make sure I can get insurance as soon as the 90-day period was up for me to get insurance, because you only get it if you work full time for those 90 days.
Right.
So those people that took off to study for their boards, they actually didn't get insured till the next year, because when they get the benefits package, HR will say, well, you didn't average 90 days, so you got the 90 days of full time, so you have to wait till the next enrollment period. So luckily, I was smart enough to guide myself through that situation. But a lot of people won't realize that. They might think, oh, well, they're going to give me insurance in 3 months. Well, check the fine print of your policy or the stipulations that you have to go through to make sure you get it, you know. But yeah, it's been a journey.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand how many nuances there are like that, but also at any one of those turning points, it really could become life-threatening. This is not like, it would be easier for me if they did this. This is literally puts your life at risk. If you lose your health insurance in March because of some sort of payment calculation problem, or you were pennies off, or you lost your job for 2 months and you literally couldn't pay it, and so you lose your health insurance, well, then all of a sudden you can be in a scenario where you cannot get insured again until the marketplace opens up on November 15th or whatever, and you choose a new plan, but that doesn't kick in until January 1. You could be waiting another 10 months before you're able to get a product again. Now, thankfully, a lot of the drug manufacturers have compassionate factor programs that you mentioned. We use those a lot. I will tell you, though, that is under duress right now in a huge way. I don't know if you're familiar with alternative funding programs and the alternative funding models. They're called AFMs or AFPs, whatever you reference them as. But this is a huge problem where there's companies that go into employer plans and they say, listen, if you exclude the drugs that are for high-cost medications like this, then we will make certain that your employees get the products that they need, which means that they're going to go over here to the manufacturers. Well, the manufacturers have caught on to this. And so what's happened is it's actually made these people go to these free product programs, but a lot of them have now reduced how much it used to be. If you need a compassion factor, you get it for 6 months. You could get it for 8 months. You could get it till open enrollment came around again. You could get it in that longer period. Now, if you've noticed, there's a trend with all of these manufacturer programs now where they're limiting how many units you can get. Most of the programs now, if you have, I just talked to a company yesterday. No, this is last week. I spoke to a very large drug manufacturer that said if you were insured on an employer plan, they're by default now, and you say, I lost my insurance, I need coverage, or I need compassion product for a period of time because this could threaten my life if I don't get access to this medication or my child's life.
Yeah, seriously.
They go to them by default now. They are now turning everybody away because these programs are abusing it so much.
Wow.
And so then you have to go back and prove that you were not on one of these employer plans that actually use this leverage. And what's happening is these companies, alternative funding models or alternative funding programs like Shark RX, and there's a whole long laundry list of these companies that do this, but they charge a commission off of how much savings they provided to the company. So the company is paying for the drugs out of pocket, and the company kind of comes back and says, well, we saved you $1 million, therefore you owe us $400,000, and they have to pay it. And they do. And they say, well, we saved $600,000, it wasn't free, but they got us the savings. Well, it was theft. It's a form of fraud because they basically charged the employer $400,000 from a program from a drug manufacturer that was intended for people who were destitute and out of options. They were intentionally allowed to exclude the drug so that they could get the free product, and the free product was then used, and that company still paid $1 million for that drug, but they didn't deliver that drug. They're out $1 million over there, but now this employer has to pay $400,000. They're making money off of the free product programs. So these drug manufacturers are starting to cut them. In some cases, they're cutting them completely. In some cases, they're trimming them back. In almost all the cases, it's going to be harder and harder and harder for patients to get that access to that medication. That's happening in our country right now, in real time.
I'm shocked that you bring that up, because actually about 6 months ago, that was brought up to me. Someone I know works for a specialty pharmacy, and they reached out to me. It was like, can you believe it? We're not going to cover specialty meds for our own employees. And I'm talking about, this is a large company.
Yeah.
And the mindset was, oh, well, they expect them to go to different avenues to get the specialty drugs. But if you think about it, if they're pharmacists, they're on the higher tier when it comes to income level of those income tiers. They wouldn't get the assistance.
Right.
So they would.
Because you have to be under a certain federal poverty level in order to be able to qualify anyway.
Exactly. And it blew my mind. But they had a big enough uproar. They changed it. They cover specialty meds again. But I remember how long the year when they brought that up, I was like, wow, how does a specialty pharmacy not cover specialty meds?
It's a slippery slope. Once you start there, like, everybody's going to be.
This is the problem, where if we don't speak up for ourselves, this stuff is far too complicated. No one else knows this stuff better than we do, the people who are living with it. But if we don't speak up for ourselves, we will not have anyone else to protect us. There is no army coming to protect us. There is no cavalry that's coming to help out in this. We are at the Alamo. And I think people don't realize that while there may be some pseudo resources out there, unless we ourselves rise up and defend the rights of what our taxpayer dollars also go to fund some of these programs, the fact that we get our medication from companies that we cannot tell them what we need or don't need, we're dealing with this issue in massive quantity underneath the issue of this PBM reform concept. It should, in my opinion, it should be outlawed that there is allowed for an insurance company to own its own pharmacy and mandate that everyone on that policy use that pharmacy. That is bizarre. The definition of double dipping. Yeah. It is the definition of fraud and abuse. And the fact that the federal government has allowed this is a shame. But you know what? Nobody's really stood up to it and said, hey guys, this is wrong. You can't allow this to do it. And here's what's happened is, in these specialized drug channels where it requires so much intricacy for people to be able to get the supplies that they need, most of the time, you guys do this all the time. Every time you distribute drugs, do you get reimbursed for the tourniquets that you send out, for the Band-Aids that you send out, for the gauze that you send out, you don't get reimbursed for any of that. All that stuff, if you have to pay for nursing, you don't get reimbursed for that. You're doing all of that out of the profits that's basically from the drugs that you distribute. Now, you can do that for only a certain amount of time. Those profits have been squeezed.
You're assuming we have a profit.
Right. Well, there you go. And in many states, a lot of these pharmacies are upside down on the distribution of drugs, and they just hope that one of the drugs that they sell or one of the people that they're reimbursed for can make up for the losses. But in a lot of cases, what's happening is that these contracts that we were sold on this concept is that, well, we do more of it by volume. In the case of these PBMs, they go into there and they do this by volume. These large companies, they're no longer specializing the care. And so they're just using it, specialized as a term for the classification of the drug. But the problem is that these patients aren't getting the Band-Aids they need. They're not getting the gauze that they need. They're not getting the sterilized alcohol swabs that they need. They're not getting the tourniquets that they need. They're not getting the syringes that they need. They're not getting the materials that they need to be able to actually administer the drug that they're receiving. Nor are they getting any instruction or any expert advice on how to take it or when to take it or whatever. And while those resources may exist somewhere buried in the huge bureaucracy of the 100,000 employees that they have, that is not the experience of the patient. They are a mail-order drug supply company that's just like trying to get your very high-cost medications from Amazon.com. It doesn't work. There's far too many intricacies that apply to these patients that need this medication on a regular basis. And we believe the best approach to that is by having pharmacies like yours and others that actually understand the intricacies of those medications, so that they can educate them and help them to be able to use them properly. We've got patients that they stick the needle in their arm, but they miss the vein and they just keep infusing it. The drug's not even going to the vein. You wouldn't know that if you're calling some big giant company that you've got to wait on hold for 5 hours and you got to hope that somebody speaks English. I mean, this is the problem that people are dealing with day in and day out. And unfortunately, people are not only suffering, but in some cases, people are losing their lives because they slip through the cracks. They end up not getting their medications on time. They end up not even knowing that the order's not been shipped or has been shipped or what have you. And all of those things, we had a hurricane here a couple of years ago, and this is a situation that I was in, had my medications coming from out of state, and it got stuck in a warehouse for 2 weeks, and nobody could get in touch with the warehouse. And it's not refrigerated, and this medication is required to be refrigerated. $150,000 worth of medication sitting that goes ruined because somebody can't answer the phone and doesn't know where it is. And at the end of the day, a large company, it gets absorbed into it. So it might be, while there might be cost savings for that company, there has been no cost savings and no service benefit to the person who's actually dependent upon that life-saving medication to sustain their life and improve their quality of life. If it's not achieving either one of those goals, then we have failed in every way.
Yeah.
And this is what we're advocating for at the highest level. That's why we've gone to DC. That's why we're continuing to work on trying to produce legislation that can actually help close the gap on this, to make smaller pharmacies who actually are experts in their field to be specialized in what they do. And every pharmacy has different ways that they focus on different medications, different types of distribution channels and different drugs. We should let specialty pharmacies be specialty pharmacies. Because it is about not just the quality of life, although that's highly important. I don't think we should apologize for advocating for quality of life, but it's also about livelihood, period. Because people are losing their lives because of medical errors that should not go.
It blows my mind. So that was one of the biggest things when we were initially building the model for this I knew as a patient myself how I got my medication, but what I didn't realize, and that came with a lot of issues where I remember one August, I just took a picture because my mind was blown. Like it's the New Orleans metro area. Like it's hot. Like humidity's over 90 degrees. It was like 98 that day. It had rained, of course, like 15 minutes before. So like half the box was underneath the carport. Half the box was like, sitting out there. So half of it's wet. The medication's hot. So at that point, it's over 85 degrees for sure. It's no good. So what am I going to do about that? So one of the main things here was it blows my mind, though, that people are so surprised when we hand deliver all of our own stuff. As an owner, as a pharmacist, as a patient, like, is it that big of a deal for us to actually, as patients, make sure that the other patients get their medication within a 24-hour span like they should, or 36 hours, straight from the manufacturer, so they don't like hand deliver that? It's not a big deal, but there's a separation there. There shouldn't be. The opportunities for us to be here, I never thought that I would be here, but working on this for the last almost 8 years now, then actually being here for a couple of years, you hear story after story after story of people, their difficulties, what they're going through. And it never ceases to shock me that either they're surprised by the fact that we're actually delivering it by hand, or that someone else isn't. Like, it's kind of equally shocking to me every time. It's like, oh, you're an owner and you're delivering. What are you doing here? You have reps call it. You do that? You really do that? Like, yeah, I do that because I'm scared. But and I care about them.
It's also concierge level service. It's saying, look, this is a very important thing to you. It's not something that should be taken lightly. It's something that you should be customizing and getting what you need when you need it, when you want.
Yeah, and there's so many great people in this area that are working as advocates, patient advocates. There's some good pharmacies here too. I mean, it's everywhere where there's quality people everywhere that love their patients, that want to be there for them, be available to them. Sometimes they get handcuffed. Sometimes they're not able to do what they want to do because they're not able to make those decisions. So that's what I feel like is one of the things that we're trying to do here, and hopefully like raise the bar, and we can bring everybody with us and lock arms with some other pharmacies along the way. But not to jump around a little bit, but going back to the problem being, you were saying like we have to speak for ourselves in this situation with the DC. What are some of the things we can do as patients to be able to help with the process?
So the number one thing that we're doing is trying to identify patients that have had these challenges and to document their stories. I think that the number one thing you can do is, if you know somebody who is forced to use a pharmacy that they don't want to use, or one that has caused harm to them, even worse, that's somebody that we want to hear their story. We want them to reach out to us. And so what we're doing is writing these articles so that we can take them into the legislative offices and areas to say, this is happening. This is documentation of it happening. This should not be allowed. And so that's the first step, I think, is just to be able to, listen for these stories as we all, bump into each other, encounter other people that might be having these problems, and have them reach out to us so that we can help to document.
So it'd be important maybe to give them a web address or something, or email that they can, if you want to plug that real quick and say where they can reach out to you, because someone might listen to this like, oh my gosh, I mean, I want to influence change. Where can I do it? And they may not know where your office is. Maybe they can email you.
Absolutely.
Email.
It's another patient that needs help right now that doesn't know exactly how. Yes.
Yeah.
Best ways.
They can always go to the website, hope-charities.org. But also you can email us at info@hope-charities.org as well. And we really need as many stories as we can. Doesn't matter what state you live in, doesn't matter where you are, but if you've had a situation where you had a need to receive your medication in a certain way or a certain timing, or there was some sort of interruption in that, or you were forced to use somebody that was really not working for you, those are the kinds of stories that we're currently collecting, because we're really making an effort to try to help wrap our arms around. But I would say some of these other issues, that's PBM reform, but there's some other issues. For instance, like preferred pricing list to me is damaging. It's a precursor to safe step therapy, which is damaging in every way. Hemophilia and bleeding disorders haven't experienced as much of this because we do have good advocates in the community. But I would say that if you've ever been prevented, where you say there's 5 drugs on my list of what's on the formulary, and the drug that I take is not on the list, and I need this particular medication, reach out to us. Tell us your story. info@hopecharities.org. That's where we want to be able to try to collect that. Those are types, because we are actively advocating for a safe step or against this fail first mindset, which is basically where you have to fail these other drugs in order to get approved for that. That should not be allowed. We live in a free country. We live in a country that should have options. I understand that all countries in the world don't have that, but in first world countries, a lot of them do. And so for our sake, we believe that we should have options for patient choice to be a priority. And that's true about the pharmacy, which is also about the PBM reform issue that we're working on. We are still working on the third-party payer prohibitions. There was about 5 years ago, there was an effort for insurance companies to suppress the ability of patients to get financial assistance by saying that they would not allow any third party to pay your out-of-pocket costs. That should not be allowed either. We think that your church or your civic group or a nonprofit organization should be allowed to be able to help you when you're going through a loss of job temporarily, or a situation where you need financial assistance because you're under a federal poverty level. This is a very highly regulated environment. We follow strict guidelines and standards that are set forth from OIG and others. And in this environment, it is very important for us to be able to support and help patients when they need it. And so we are fighting against third party. Again, if you encounter people, or if you're listening to this, you've had that experience where you actually have experience where your insurance company dropped your coverage or caused harm to you because you received assistance from a nonprofit organization, or from one of these manufacturer programs, or some other way. We need to hear about those stories. And so we're systematically collecting in this area. This is something that's the only way for us to get organized is at a grassroots level, is for us to be able to, document. They always say, like in medical terms, you guys deal with this every day, is that if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And so unfortunately, that's the world we live in. So we got to document these stories, and then we're going to do everything we can as an organization to take these stories to our delegates and say, there has to be change, and patient should be priority over profit 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a pharmacy perspective, what we can bring to the table, though, is being a patient. I understand the gripes that I've gone through with the specialties and the endless phone tags, or not having a point person to contact, or asking a question knowing on the other side they don't even know what's going on in your life or about your disease state at all, because you're one of 10,000 different diseases out there.
Right.
But so we bring that to the table where we can relate to our small specialty better. But from the PBM reform, how can we help people when they're making these contracts that are either excluding us from even joining in on them? I mean, it's hard to get a contract. It's not like you can open a pharmacy and you can help anyone. They actually make it preventative for us to help other people within our own realm. But on top of that, even the negotiated contract plans. Because, I mean, there have been times where we have to sit there and it's like, okay, we're going to lose thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to help this person. But we're going to help them because that's what they need ultimately.
Yeah.
But they're making us make those calls. I'm sure, the big companies that are direct line, they own their own PBMs, they own the insurance company, they own the pharmacy, they own every aspect of healthcare. They're directly integrated. They're breaking themselves off better contracts, and they're not hurting like they're making the other pharmacies hurt,
Yeah.
and it's going to make it harder to help other people. And we need reform to get that, to make it fair for everyone to have an equal chance at being able to help people, because you might be suppressing some good voices, suppressing some great companies that are there to help people, but can't financially make that happen.
Yeah. I know we dragged you a long way over here for this, but if somebody wants to donate to Hope or what you guys are doing right now, how do they do that?
Easy. Just go to the website, hope-charities.org, and there's a little button at the top that says donate. Click on that, and you can go and donate. You can specify what program you want your donation to go to, or you can just donate to the organization from there. So there's a lot of ways to do that. And then also you can just send a check the old-fashioned way.
There's no limit, right? There could be an individual. It could be any sort of a company. It doesn't matter.
That's correct.
Yeah. Is there a tax write-off associated with it? Because, so that's always good.
Yeah, we are a 501c3, and so, we can provide a charitable donation, as a receipt for tax purposes.
No, we love what you guys are doing. Miss being a part of it, being on the other side of the fence, but I still like hearing what's going on. So
yeah,
thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
That's good. And drag you back on here, Stan.
We learned so much.
Yeah, we keep going all day.
It's really good.
All right.
Y'all have a good.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.